The morning mist clung to the pastures like a final kiss goodbye. Jacob Miles stood at the edge of his ranch, boots planted in familiar dirt, the smell of dew and worn leather thick in the air. At 73, his body had begun to betray him, but his eyes still held the steely resolve of a man who had once tamed wild colts with just a rope and his voice. His gaze was fixed on the paddock where a dappled gray gelding stood still as stone, ears twitching at the breeze, mane tousled by age and wind. The horse's name was Dusty, though time had dulled the sheen that once matched his name. 25 years. That's how long Jacob had ridden him. Through bitter winters and blistering summers, through joy, loss, and every moment in between. Dusty had carried Jacob through the years like a shadow that never left, unspoken loyalty tethered by something deeper than reins. Jacob reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old apple, bruised on one side. Dusty approached without haste, the slow, deliberate steps of an animal who no longer needed to prove anything. Their ritual hadn't changed in a quarter century. Treat first, saddle second, ride always. I suppose you're more bones than beast these days, Jacob muttered softly, rubbing Dusty's forehead. The gelding exhaled through his nostrils and nudged the apple from Jacob's hand. His teeth were worn, but he managed. Inside the barn, the morning light cast long shadows across the beams, illuminating dust motes that danced like spirits in the air. Everything was where it had always been. Jacob saw to that. Routine had become his fortress. The saddle, aged and mended, still carried the imprint of his body. It wasn't just leather and metal. It was history, muscle memory, and silent conversations shared over 25 years. He saddled Dusty with slow reverence, feeling every creak in his back and every throb in his knees. Dusty didn't flinch. He stood quiet, as if knowing this morning carried more weight than usual. As Jacob cinched the strap, a quiet voice broke the silence. "You really going to ride today?" Jacob turned. At the barn entrance stood Lily, his granddaughter, arms crossed, worry written all over her face. She was 19, fiercely bright, and the only family who hadn't drifted or disappeared. She had grown up on this ranch, running through hayfields and falling asleep in Dusty's stall, but now she was studying veterinary medicine in the city. Still, she always came back. "Don't give me that look," Jacob said, half smiling, half scolding. "You said last year was the last ride." "I did," he admitted, patting Dusty's flank. "But he ain't ready, and neither am I." Lily stepped closer, boots crunching on the barn floor. "He limps when it's cold. And you don't even take the stairs straight anymore. This isn't stubbornness, Grandpa. It's dangerous." Jacob leaned against the stall door and looked at her, really looked at her. She had her mother's fire, his late daughter's determination etched into her every word. Then maybe dangerous is the only thing that still makes sense. She flinched at that, but said nothing more. She knew better than to argue with a man who had buried a wife, a daughter, and 4 brothers, and had never once cried in front of a soul. But there was something behind his eyes now, something fragile and flickering. The ride wasn't about the trail or the wind in his face. It wasn't even about Dusty. It was about closure, about finishing something before the world finished it for him. Outside, the sky began to clear. Jacob led Dusty through the gate, past the old post, where his wife once tied up laundry that danced like flags in the summer sun. Everything had changed. The barn roof had been patched a dozen times. The fence leaned like an old man at rest. But the land still hummed with memory, and Dusty still walked beside him with the same steady grace. He mounted with effort, a grunt escaping as his hips fought gravity. Dusty adjusted under the weight, then stood calm, as if waiting for a command he already knew. They started slow, the path winding past the orchard, then down the slope where the stream had once overflowed and nearly washed the fence away. The trees were thinner now. Age had stolen leaves, bark, even roots. But as Dusty trotted gently, Jacob felt a flicker of what once was. He remembered Lily's mother, riding ahead on her pony, squealing with joy. He remembered his wife waving from the porch, flowers still on her apron. He remembered Dusty's first ride, when the horse had nearly bucked him off just to see if he was worthy. "You tried to kill me back then," Jacob said aloud, chuckling. Dusty's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. They crossed into the far pasture, a space they hadn't visited in months. There was a patch of wild clover there, and Dusty leaned to sniff it. Jacob let him. They weren't riding to get anywhere. They were riding because it was the only thing that had ever made sense. Movement, motion, the feel of life between his knees and under his hands. But time was relentless. Halfway through the loop, Jacob felt his body begin to stiffen. His left hand trembled slightly on the reins. Dusty slowed, sensing the change. Jacob dismounted with care, but once his boots hit the ground, his breath caught. His chest ached. Not sharply, more like an old pressure reminding him he was a guest in this world now, not its owner. He leaned against Dusty, fingers gripping the reins tighter than before. Guess we're not as young as we think, boy. The wind picked up then, cold and sudden, stirring leaves and memories alike. Jacob closed his eyes. In that moment he saw it all. His first kiss under the barn loft, his daughter's bare feet chasing chickens. The night he nearly sold Dusty when money got tight, but couldn't do it, couldn't say goodbye. When he opened his eyes, Lily was standing by the gate. She had followed, maybe out of concern, maybe because she knew this was more than a ride. Her face softened when she saw him leaning, worn and quiet. "I brought the truck," she said gently. "In case." Jacob looked down at the reins in his hand. Dusty stood still, waiting, ever patient. He nodded once. "All right, let's give him one more gallop home." "Grandpa." "Just one." And so he mounted again, pain be damned. Dusty's ears perked. His muscles tightened. Even at his age, he knew what came next. He pushed into a trot, then a lope, and for one fleeting, glorious stretch of pasture, they galloped like ghosts through time. Jacob laughed. It cracked from his chest, deep and true, like thunder over dry land. The years melted. The pain dimmed. Dusty's hooves pounded rhythm into the earth, and the wind carried their memory across the hills. At the gate, Jacob pulled back on the reins. Dusty slowed. His breathing was shallow but proud. Jacob dismounted again, this time with less grace. He leaned against the fence, wiped sweat from his brow, and turned to Lily. "That," he whispered, "was the final ride." She walked to him, her eyes glossy with tears. He handed her the reins. "You take care of him now." Lily took them silently. Dusty nuzzled her shoulder, as if already acknowledging the shift. She looked at her grandfather, not broken, not beaten, but at peace. Jacob took one last look at the pasture. Then he turned toward the house, walking slow, each step an echo of a lifetime on horseback. The days that followed Jacob's final ride unfolded like pages from a well-worn journal, familiar, yet tinged with the melancholy of an ending chapter. The ranch, once alive with the rhythm of hooves and the creak of saddle leather, now echoed with a profound stillness. Dusty's stall remained open, the scent of hay and aged wood lingering, a silent testament to years of companionship. Lily found herself drawn to the barn each morning, her footsteps hesitant as she approached the empty stall. She would run her fingers along the worn edges of the saddle, the leather cool and smooth beneath her touch. Memories flooded her of childhood rides, of laughter carried by the wind, of her grandfather's steady presence beside her. Jacob, meanwhile, spent his days in quiet reflection. He would sit on the porch, gazing out at the pastures, his eyes tracing the paths he and Dusty had once traveled. The silence was both comforting and deafening, filled with the ghosts of rides past and the weight of unspoken words. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the land, Lily approached Jacob, a determined look in her eyes. "Grandpa," she began, her voice steady, "I've been thinking about the ranch." Jacob turned to her, his gaze steady. "What about it?" "I want to keep it going," she said. "I want to honor what you and Dusty built." A flicker of surprise crossed Jacob's face, quickly replaced by a mixture of pride and concern. "It's a hard life, Lily. Not many choose it these days." "I know," she replied, "but it's in my blood. I feel it every time I walk these fields." Jacob nodded slowly, the corners of his mouth lifting in a faint smile. "Then let's see what we can do. Together, they began the task of breathing new life into the ranch. Fences were mended, stalls cleaned, and the barn echoed once more with the sounds of activity. Lily took the lead, her energy and determination infusing the place with a renewed sense of purpose. As they worked side by side, Jacob shared stories of the past, of the early days with Dusty, of challenges faced and overcome, of lessons learned on the back of a horse. Lily listened intently, absorbing the wisdom woven into each tale. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Lily turned to Jacob. "Tell me about the first time you rode Dusty," she said. Jacob chuckled softly. He was a spirited one, full of fire. "Nearly threw me off more times than I can count. But there was something about him, something that told me he was special." Lily smiled. "Sounds like he was." "He was more than a horse," Jacob said, his voice tinged with emotion. "He was a partner, a friend. He taught me more than any person ever could." The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with shared memories and unspoken understanding. As the days turned into weeks, the ranch began to thrive once more. Neighbors stopped by to offer support, and the community rallied around Lily's efforts. The bond between grandfather and granddaughter deepened, forged through shared labor and mutual respect. Yet, amidst the revival, Jacob's health began to wane. The long days took their toll, and he found himself growing tired more easily. Lily noticed the change, her concern growing with each passing day. One morning, she found Jacob sitting on the porch, a distant look in his eyes. "Grandpa, are you okay?" she asked gently. He looked at her, a faint smile on his lips. "Just thinking about Dusty, about the rides we took, the places we went." Lily sat beside him, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "He was a big part of your life." Jacob nodded. "He was. And now, it's your turn to make memories." Lily squeezed his hand. "I will, Grandpa. I promise." As the seasons changed, so did the rhythm of the ranch. New horses were brought in, and Lily began offering riding lessons to local children. The laughter and energy breathed new life into the place, echoing through the fields and barns. Jacob watched with quiet pride, his heart full as he saw Lily embracing the legacy he had built. Though his body grew weaker, his spirit remained strong, buoyed by the knowledge that the ranch was in capable hands. One crisp autumn morning, Jacob called Lily to his side. "I want you to have something," he said, handing her a small, weathered box. Inside, Lily found a collection of photographs, images of Jacob and Dusty over the years, snapshots of their journey together. "These are our memories," Jacob said. "Keep them close, and remember the bond we shared." Tears welled in Lily's eyes as she embraced her grandfather. "Thank you, Grandpa. I'll cherish them always." In the days that followed, Jacob's health continued to decline. He spent more time resting, his energy fading like the autumn leaves. Lily remained by his side, offering comfort and companionship. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, Jacob took Lily's hand. "You've made me proud," he whispered. "The ranch, Dusty, everything, it's all in good hands." Lily nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'll keep it going, Grandpa. I promise." With a final smile, Jacob closed his eyes, his breathing slowing until it ceased altogether. The ranch mourned the loss of its patriarch, the man who had built it with his own hands and heart. But in the midst of sorrow, there was also hope, a legacy carried forward by a granddaughter determined to honor the past while forging a new future. As Lily stood in the pasture, the wind rustling through the grass, she felt a presence beside her, a whisper of hooves, a gentle nudge of a muzzle. Dusty's spirit and Jacob's lived on in every corner of the ranch, guiding her steps as she continued the journey they had begun together. Morning light spilled gently across the meadow as Thomas rose before dawn. His joints ached, not just with age but with the knowledge of what the day meant. The final ride, the last trail, a journey he had taken 1,000 times, and yet this one felt unlike any other. The house was quiet except for the creaking floorboards and the distant whinny of Duke waiting at the fence line. The old stallion somehow sensed the weight of the moment. Thomas moved slowly, gathering Duke's tack piece by piece as if handling sacred relics. Each leather strap had a story, each worn edge a memory. He paused with the saddle in his hands, the same one he'd used since their first proper trail ride 25 years ago. Duke had been wild then, spirited, nearly untamable. People told him he was mad for trying to ride a horse like that, but he hadn't just ridden him. He'd lived life beside him. Outside, the morning dew clung to the grass like a final layer of fog between what had been and what was coming. Duke stood still as Thomas approached, his graying mane drifting with the breeze. He didn't protest the saddle. He didn't twitch at the bit. He simply looked at Thomas, eyes calm and deep with knowing. There was no need for words. That gaze spoke volumes. "I'm ready." They started slow, just like they had for years, down the winding trail behind the barn, past the whispering pines, and out toward the ridge. The wind tugged at Thomas's coat, cooler than expected for spring, but he welcomed it. It kept his senses sharp, reminded him he was still here, still alive in this moment with Duke beneath him. The stallion moved with surprising energy, as if youth had returned for one final outing. Thomas thought of the letter in his coat pocket, folded 3 times, edges worn from nervous fingers. It was addressed to the young woman who had come by the farm a month ago, Rachel. She was the granddaughter of Samuel Griggs, an old friend and rival from his early riding days. She had spoken with fire in her eyes about horses, about healing, about carrying forward what the older generation was letting fade. She had watched Duke from a distance with quiet awe. Thomas had seen the way her hand hovered near the fence, wanting to touch but respecting the boundary. That was all he needed to know. She was the right one. This ride was his farewell, but it was also the handoff, the final chapter of his bond with Duke, and the first page of someone else's. They reached the clearing where Thomas had built a wooden bench many years ago. It faced the valley, golden with wildflowers now, as the river sparkled like silver ribbon below. He dismounted slowly, knees protesting, and Duke stayed by his side, unmoving. Thomas sat and took out the letter. He read it aloud, his voice thick. "To Rachel, if you're reading this, then I've decided to let go. Not of memories, but of ownership. Duke isn't just a horse. He's my past, my partner, and now he's your future. Treat him as a friend, not a project. Let him show you his wisdom. In return, give him your heart. That's all he's ever asked of me. With respect, Thomas Keller." He folded the letter again and tucked it into the saddlebag. Then he stood and walked toward Duke, his hand brushing the horse's neck in a long, lingering stroke. The stallion nuzzled his chest, pressing in close. Thomas rested his forehead against Duke's. "We had a good run, old boy. A damn good run." The wind lifted again, scattering a few leaves around their feet. Somewhere in the trees, a hawk cried, a sharp, distant farewell. The trail back felt heavier. Each step Duke took seemed etched in time. But Thomas didn't rush. He wanted this. He wanted to remember the exact way Duke's muscles moved beneath him, the rhythm of hooves against earth, the way the horizon always felt just one heartbeat away when they rode together. Back at the farm, Rachel was waiting near the barn. Her hands were clasped nervously, boots dusted with trail soil. Thomas could tell she didn't know what to expect. She smiled when she saw them, and Duke let out a low breath, recognizing her scent. Thomas dismounted and walked Duke the rest of the way to her. "He's yours now," Thomas said gently. Rachel blinked. "But you thought I'd hold on till the end." "I thought that too." He chuckled softly. "But what matters isn't how long we ride. It's knowing when to let someone else take the reins." She reached out hesitantly, laying a hand on Duke's shoulder. The stallion didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned into her, just as he had with Thomas. Tears welled up in her eyes. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Thomas whispered. He knows too. He turned then, walking slowly toward the house, not daring to look back. He didn't need to. The story he'd lived with Duke was ending, but another was just beginning. Days passed, then weeks. Rachel returned often, tending to Duke with quiet devotion. She never tried to make him run faster than he wanted, never pushed too hard. She understood him the way Thomas had, with patience and instinct. Thomas watched from the porch, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. Duke had grown quieter, but not weaker. The bond he was forming with Rachel wasn't a replacement for the old one. It was an extension, a continuation, legacy in motion. One morning, Thomas didn't wake. He passed peacefully in his sleep. The letter he'd written to Rachel left out on the nightstand, along with an old photo of him and Duke, years younger, racing along a sunlit path. Rachel stood at the funeral beside Duke, the stallion silent and dignified. Not a single neigh or paw of protest, just presence, strong, steady, unshaken. As the preacher spoke of legacy and love, Duke turned his head toward the hills, ears pricked. He knew. In the months that followed, Rachel turned the farm into a sanctuary, not just for horses like Duke, but for old riders, lost veterans, kids who needed second chances. She kept Thomas's saddle on a stand in the barn, untouched, a reminder of where everything had started. And every now and then, when the wind was just right and the sun touched the valley the way it used to, she'd take Duke up to that ridge, sit on the bench, and read the letter again. Not because she needed reminding, but because she wanted to hear his voice one more time. The final ride had come and gone, but the journey, the real journey, never ended.